Have you ever made a snap judgment about someone based solely on their appearance? That instant when an idea flashes in your mind, shaped by what you see and not by what you know. This story begins with such a moment where a man thought he knew, but as it turned out, he was profoundly mistaken. Let us together unveil this mystery. The main lobby of the Phoenix Tower office building gleamed under the bright lights. It was precisely 10:15 in the morning. Jacob Miller, a middle-aged man with a slightly weathered face and a neatly pressed security guard uniform, stood watch just inside the main entrance. He had been doing this job for nearly 10 years, and his eyes had grown accustomed to scanning the hundreds of faces that passed through the doors each day, categorizing them into employees, clients, delivery personnel, or occasionally those who seemed out of place. Today, it appeared to be a routine day. The usual flow of people moved in and out. Then, from a distance, his attention was drawn to a woman approaching the building. She had a deep coffee-colored complexion, and her thick, curly hair was pulled back neatly behind her head. A loose-fitting trench coat concealed her figure, and her shoes looked rather worn. In her hand, she carried only a simple brown handbag, which did not appear to be expensive. As the woman drew nearer, Jacob tightened his grip on the radio clipped to his shoulder. A thought flickered through his mind. She doesn't look like she belongs here. Just as she stepped onto the first marble step leading into the lobby, Jacob spoke, his tone firm but maintaining a semblance of politeness. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, positioning himself slightly to block her path. The woman stopped, her large brown eyes meeting his, showing no immediate sign of confusion or alarm. "Can I help you?" Jacob asked, attempting to keep his voice neutral and devoid of any discernible bias, though a subtle hint of suspicion lingered beneath the surface. He had learned over the years to project an air of authority, a necessary component of his job, but today, something about this woman triggered an instinctive caution within him. "I would like to enter the building," she replied, her voice a low, resonant tone that carried a quiet confidence. There was an inherent dignity in her posture and the way she held herself, yet Jacob's initial impression based on her attire remained stubbornly fixed in his mind. Jacob's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. "This is a private office building, ma'am. I'm afraid you can't just walk in without an employee badge or a scheduled appointment." He delivered this line with practiced ease, a standard response he had given countless times to individuals who appeared to be loitering or attempting to gain unauthorized access. He prided himself on his vigilance and his ability to maintain the security of the building. The woman raised her eyebrows slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her face, quickly followed by a look that suggested she had encountered similar situations before. It was a look that spoke of quiet resilience and an understanding of the unspoken biases that permeated certain aspects of society. "I do have an appointment," she stated, her voice remaining calm and even, despite the implicit accusation in Jacob's tone. She reached inside her loose coat, and Jacob instinctively tensed, his hand hovering near his side. However, instead of a weapon or anything threatening, she produced a sleek, modern smartphone. "Could you please show me some identification and information about the person you are scheduled to meet?" Jacob requested, his eyes scanning her from head to toe once more, taking in the worn shoes, the simple handbag, and the unfashionable coat. Each detail seemed to reinforce his initial prejudiced assessment. He felt a sense of justification for his actions, believing he was simply doing his job. The woman let out a soft sigh, a barely audible exhalation of breath that hinted at a weariness with such encounters. Then, from within her unassuming brown handbag, she retrieved the aforementioned smartphone. Her fingers danced across the screen for a moment as she navigated through her messages. Finally, she extended the phone towards Jacob, displaying a text message prominently on the screen. Jacob leaned in to take a quick glance. The sender was listed as Chairman's Office. The content of the message was brief and to the point. Ms. Evelyn Carter will be arriving at 10:15 a.m. Please provide assistance. Despite seeing the message, a seed of doubt began to sprout in Jacob's mind, but his ingrained biases fought to maintain their hold. The image of a chairman of a major corporation did not align with the woman standing before him. He still harbored a lingering suspicion. "Excuse me, but I need to verify this," Jacob said, his voice still carrying a note of authority, though perhaps slightly less certain than before. "Could you please tell me your full name?" He wanted to hear the name directly from her, as if that would somehow provide further confirmation or contradiction to his preconceived notions. "Evelyn Carter," the woman replied, her gaze now holding a hint of steel, the earlier surprise replaced by a quiet firmness. There was no anger in her voice, but a palpable sense of being unjustly questioned. Jacob hesitated for a fleeting second. The name sounded vaguely familiar, a name he might have overheard in passing conversations among the building's staff, but he couldn't quite place it. He glanced again at the woman's attire, the oversized coat, the scuffed shoes, the plain handbag. None of it seemed to fit the image he conjured of someone with an appointment in the chairman's office, let alone being the chairman herself. His internal conflict was evident in the furrow of his brow and the slight tremor in his hand as he held the phone. "I apologize, Ms. Carter, but according to protocol, I need to make a quick phone call to confirm your appointment before I can grant you access," Jacob stated, attempting to mask the growing unease he felt. He reached for the radio on his shoulder, his fingers fumbling slightly with the controls. He knew he should have simply allowed her entry after seeing the message, but his preconceived notions had taken over, and now he felt compelled to follow the strictest interpretation of the rules to justify his initial actions. Evelyn Carter remained silent, her gaze fixed on Jacob. There was no overt anger in her expression, but her eyes conveyed a profound sense of disappointment, a quiet sorrow at being judged so quickly and so unfairly. It was a look that spoke volumes about the subtle prejudices that people of color often faced in their daily lives. Just as Jacob was about to press the button on his radio to call the reception desk, Evelyn Carter shook her head gently, a subtle movement that nonetheless conveyed a clear message. "It's quite all right," she said, her voice now carrying a note of finality, a hint of weariness with having to justify her presence. "If this is the way this building welcomes its guests, perhaps I have come to the wrong place." With a slight nod, a gesture that held both resignation and a quiet dignity, Evelyn Carter turned and walked away. Jacob stood there, watching her retreating figure, a vague sense of discomfort settling in his stomach. He tried to rationalize his actions, telling himself that he was simply following procedure, that he couldn't be too careful. Yet, a nagging feeling persisted, a whisper in the back of his mind that suggested he might have made a grave error. He watched as she disappeared around the corner, the image of her worn shoes and simple handbag lingering in his memory. The morning, which had started as ordinary, now held a subtle undercurrent of unease. A few minutes drifted by, each one feeling heavier than the last for Jacob. He had resumed his post, his gaze sweeping across the lobby, but his mind kept replaying the encounter with the woman in the trench coat. There was something about her calm demeanor, even when he was questioning her authority, that lingered in his thoughts. He had dealt with countless individuals trying to gain unauthorized access over the years, and their reactions were usually marked by either defensiveness or attempts at persuasion. This woman had simply accepted his decision and walked away with a quiet dignity that now, in retrospect, seemed unsettling. Suddenly, the radio clipped to his shoulder buzzed to life, the unexpected sound cutting through his internal monologue. The voice of the dispatcher, a young woman named Sarah, crackled through the speaker. "Jacob, you have a call from the chairman's office. They wish to speak with you." Jacob felt a jolt of surprise, followed by a wave of apprehension. The chairman's office? Why on earth would they be calling him? He couldn't recall any recent incidents or security breaches that would warrant their attention. His mind raced, trying to piece together any possible reason for this unusual contact. Had someone reported his interaction with the woman? Had he somehow violated protocol in a more significant way than he realized? He fumbled slightly with the talk button, his heart beginning to thump a little faster against his ribs. "Jacob Miller here, go ahead." The voice on the other end was crisp and professional, clearly belonging to someone in a position of authority. "Mr. Miller, this is Ms. Davies, the secretary to Ms. Evelyn Carter. Ms. Carter has just arrived and has mentioned a slight misunderstanding in the lobby. She requests your presence in the main conference room on the top floor immediately." A cold wave washed over Jacob. A slight misunderstanding? The phrase felt like a significant understatement. His initial discomfort now solidified into a feeling of genuine dread. He swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly feeling dry. He could only imagine what this misunderstanding entailed and the potential repercussions for him. "Understood, Ms. Davies," Jacob replied, his voice sounding a little strained even to his own ears. He disconnected the call, his mind now consumed by a whirlwind of anxious thoughts. He had to go to the top floor, to the chairman's office, to face the consequences of his actions. He couldn't shake the feeling that the woman he had turned away was somehow connected to this summons. With a growing sense of foreboding, Jacob hurried towards the elevators. His usual confident stride was replaced by a hesitant gait. His shoulders slightly slumped. He pressed the button for the top floor, the highest level of the Phoenix Tower, a floor he rarely had reason to visit. As he waited for the elevator car to descend, he glanced at his reflection in the polished metal doors. His uniform, usually a source of pride, now felt like a symbol of his misjudgment. He smoothed down his tie and tried to compose himself, but the knot of anxiety in his stomach tightened with each passing second. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, and Jacob stepped inside. He pressed the button for the penthouse level, the button illuminating with a soft blue light. The doors slid shut, and the car began its smooth ascent. The silence within the elevator felt heavy, amplifying the frantic thoughts racing through Jacob's mind. He replayed the encounter with Evelyn Carter in his head, scrutinizing every detail of their interaction. Her calm demeanor, her quiet confidence, her simple request to enter the building. All of it now seemed to point towards someone of significant importance. Why hadn't he seen it then? Why had he allowed his preconceived notions to cloud his judgment so completely? The numbers above the door ticked upwards slowly, each floor feeling like a step closer to an inevitable confrontation. Jacob's palms began to sweat, and he wiped them nervously on his trousers. He wondered what Miss Carter would say to him. Would she be angry? Would she demand his dismissal? The thought sent a shiver of fear down his spine. This job was more than just a paycheck to him. It was his livelihood, his sense of purpose. Finally, with another soft chime, The elevator reached the top floor and the doors slid open. Jacob stepped out into a spacious, elegantly decorated hallway. The air here felt different, more refined, more exclusive. Thick carpets muffled his footsteps, and the walls were adorned with modern art. This was a world far removed from the bustling lobby below. Jacob followed the discreet signage that pointed towards the main conference room. As he approached a large, imposing mahogany door, he noticed a small group of impeccably dressed individuals standing outside, their expressions a mixture of concern and curiosity. He recognized a few of them, senior executives he had seen occasionally in the lobby, always accompanied by an air of importance. Their presence here only heightened Jacob's sense of unease. One of the executives, a well-dressed man in a dark suit whom Jacob often saw escorting the CEO, noticed him and offered a curt nod. "Mr. Miller," he said, his tone polite but somewhat dismissive. "Ms. Carter is expecting you. Please go right in." Ms. Carter? Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't heard anyone refer to the chairman as Ms. Carter before. He had always assumed the chairman was a man, a powerful figure he had only ever seen in photographs displayed in the lobby. The realization that the chairman was a woman, and possibly the woman he had just turned away, sent another wave of shock through him. Taking a deep breath, Jacob pushed open the heavy door and stepped into the conference room. The room was vast and impressive, dominated by a long, polished table surrounded by luxurious leather chairs. All eyes in the room turned towards him as he entered. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. At the far end of the room, standing on a raised platform, was a woman. As Jacob's eyes focused on her, his entire body froze. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was her, the woman from the lobby. But now, the loose-fitting trench coat was gone, replaced by a sophisticated business suit that accentuated her elegant figure. Her curly hair was styled impeccably, and her feet were now adorned with a pair of sleek, high-heeled shoes. She exuded an aura of power and authority that was undeniable. Standing beside her was a distinguished-looking man at a podium, holding a microphone. He was in the middle of an introduction. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed through the room, commanding attention. "Today, we have the distinct honor of welcoming our new chairman of the board, Ms. Evelyn Carter." Jacob stood there, rooted to the spot, his mind reeling. Evelyn Carter, chairman of the board. It was the same name he had seen in the text message. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening thud. He had not just turned away a visitor. He had turned away the most powerful person in the entire company. Evelyn Carter stepped forward onto the podium, a warm and confident smile gracing her lips. She scanned the room, her gaze meeting the eyes of each executive and employee present. And then her eyes stopped, focusing on Jacob, who was still standing awkwardly near the entrance, feeling like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. There was no anger in her eyes, no hint of recrimination. Instead, a gentle, almost knowing smile touched her lips. But it was that very smile, that quiet understanding and unspoken forgiveness in her gaze, that made Jacob feel more profoundly ashamed and humiliated than any harsh words could have. He understood in that instant the magnitude of his error, the depth of his prejudice. He had allowed his narrow-minded assumptions to dictate his actions, and now he was facing the consequences of his profound misjudgment. The truth, stark and undeniable, had been revealed, leaving Jacob to grapple with the weight of his prejudice and the certainty of his regret. The conference room slowly emptied as the meeting concluded. Jacob remained standing near the entrance, his heart pounding in his chest. He watched as the executives filed out, their faces a mixture of respect and perhaps a hint of amusement at the security guard who had unknowingly turned away their new chairman. He knew he had to speak to Evelyn Carter, to offer a sincere apology for his behavior. The weight of his prejudice pressed down on him, a heavy burden of guilt and shame. He waited patiently in the hallway outside the conference room, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, his knuckles white. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his anxiety growing with each passing moment. He rehearsed what he wanted to say in his head, trying to find the right words to express his remorse without sounding insincere or self-pitying. He knew that a simple "I'm sorry" wouldn't be enough to undo the disrespect he had shown. Finally, the large mahogany doors of the conference room opened, and Evelyn Carter emerged, accompanied by a couple of her senior staff members. Jacob took a deep breath and stepped forward, his head bowed low in a gesture of humility and regret. "Ms. Carter," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, filled with genuine remorse. I am so incredibly sorry. I made a terrible mistake this morning. There is no excuse for my behavior, and I deeply regret the way I treated you." He kept his gaze fixed on the floor, unable to meet her eyes, feeling the heat of embarrassment rising in his cheeks. Evelyn Carter stopped, her two colleagues pausing respectfully behind her. She looked at Jacob for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched, amplifying Jacob's discomfort. He could feel the weight of her gaze upon him, and he braced himself for the reprimand he knew he deserved. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm and measured, carrying the same quiet confidence he had noticed in the lobby. "Jacob," she said, her tone devoid of anger or accusation, but carrying a certain gravity. "Today you were given an opportunity for reflection. You saw firsthand how easily we can be misled by our preconceived notions." She paused, her eyes softening slightly as she continued. "The important thing now is not just the apology, although I appreciate it. What truly matters is how you choose to act from this moment forward. Prejudice can blind us to the truth. It can prevent us from seeing the value and potential in others. But change comes from acknowledging our biases, learning from our mistakes, and actively working to overcome them." She reached out and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, a gesture that surprised Jacob. It was not a gesture of dismissal or condemnation, but rather one of understanding and encouragement. "I hope you will take this experience to heart, Jacob. I hope you will remember that every person deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their appearance or background." With a final, reassuring squeeze on his shoulder, Evelyn Carter smiled faintly and then turned to her colleagues, signaling that they should continue. She walked down the hallway, her presence radiating quiet strength and grace, leaving Jacob standing there, lost in thought. He lifted his head slowly, watching her disappear around the corner. The weight on his chest hadn't completely vanished, but it felt lighter now, replaced by a sense of clarity and a renewed commitment to do better. He realized that Evelyn Carter's response had been far more impactful than any scolding could have been. She had offered him not just forgiveness, but also a valuable lesson in empathy and understanding. The encounter with Evelyn Carter served as a profound turning point for Jacob. He spent the rest of the day reflecting on his actions and the underlying biases that had driven them. He thought about all the times he might have made similar snap judgments, all the times he might have treated someone unfairly based on superficial appearances. The realization was sobering, even painful. He understood now that prejudice wasn't always loud and overt. Sometimes, it was subtle, ingrained, a product of societal conditioning and unconscious assumptions. He had allowed stereotypes to shape his perception of Evelyn Carter, and in doing so, he had not only disrespected her but also revealed a flaw within himself. The lesson Evelyn Carter imparted resonated deeply within him. It wasn't just about being polite or following rules. It was about seeing the humanity in every individual, recognizing their inherent worth, and treating them with the respect they deserved, regardless of their social status, race, or any other superficial characteristic. He recalled a quote he had once read, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." He realized that his prejudice was a form of darkness, and the only way to overcome it was through the light of understanding and empathy. From that day forward, Jacob made a conscious effort to challenge his own biases and to approach every person he encountered with an open mind and a respectful attitude. He started paying closer attention to his thoughts and reactions, questioning his initial judgments and seeking to understand the stories behind the faces he saw. It wasn't an easy process, and he knew he would likely stumble at times, but he was determined to change, to grow, and to become a better version of himself. The encounter with Evelyn Carter, though initially humiliating, had ultimately become a catalyst for positive transformation in his life. The story of Jacob and Evelyn reminds us that prejudice can manifest in unexpected ways and can have a significant impact on individuals. It highlights the importance of self-reflection and the power of empathy in overcoming our biases. We hope this story has resonated with you and has encouraged you to examine your own preconceived notions. If you found this narrative thought-provoking and insightful, please consider sharing it with others. Your support helps us to continue creating content that explores important social themes and promotes understanding and compassion. And if you are interested in watching more stories that delve into the complexities of human nature and societal issues, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. We have a wealth of compelling narratives waiting for you, each designed to spark conversation and inspire positive change. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to sharing our next story with you soon.